my name's Serena and I made this video to talk about what it was like to get my tonsils out, which I did about a month ago. And I decided to make this video because I watched so many of these videos during my own recovery. I've read so many blog posts on it, and as everyone's experience is different and my experience didn't quite match up exactly to anyone else's, I thought I would make this video to reassure people with similar experiences to mine and provide a frank and honest account for anyone who is scheduled for and is also considering having the surgery. And there's a trigger warning that I reference issues such as weight and mental health in this video, and I will warn before I talk about these, but I thought I'd give it as a PSA for anyone who might get affected by it or doesn't want to see or hear about that. So the main thing that people ask me is why I had the surgery and if it was really necessary. And I always say yes, it definitely was, because I've suffered with tonsillitis on and off for the last 10 years. It's had a really negative impact on my life, from missing most of my GCSE mock exams and having my predicted grades all over the place from that, from ruining my graduation day and holidays I've had to New York, Amsterdam and Prague. And having to cart my antibiotics through duty free became a regular occurrence for me because I had tonsillitis that much. And I'm most annoyed because I begged my old GP surgery to refer me to the waiting list for a tonsillectomy back in 2013, 2014, and when at that point I was getting tonsillitis about 5 or 6 times a year. And the operation would have actually entailed a shorter recovery. I think for kids it is around 7 days, whereas for adults it's a lot longer because your tonsils have become bigger and more infected and you have more scar tissue. So yeah, that was also back when I had a lot of free time that I could afford to take off, because taking 2 weeks off work was a pain and a real inconvenience for everyone involved. And because my GP surgery refused and said that it was effectively a pointless surgery that would do more harm than good at that point in my life, I went through many bouts of infections. And by the time I went to uni, my tonsils had swollen to twice their normal size and were hindering my ability to eat properly and also causing me to snore quite a lot, which anyone who's ever slept in a bed with me would complain about. And despite this, the surgery still told me that I shouldn't have them out, and I believed them because you trust doctors, don't you? And this was also the reason that I didn't pay to get them taken out privately, which I had considered many times. Well, it turns out that that GP surgery was just lazy and couldn't be bothered to refer me to the tonsillectomy waiting list, because I moved house a year ago and have had tonsillitis twice since then. The first time was during COVID restrictions in April, so the doctor couldn't physically see me, but the second time was back in August and they called me in to be assessed to be formally prescribed antibiotics, as they normally do. And my new GP took one look at my swollen tonsils and said that they should have come out years ago, as they were so swollen and scarred from all the infections that I'd had in school and uni that they were actually causing more harm than good and were the cause of the bouts of illnesses that I'd had at uni, which I thought were general viral infections I was picking up because I had a weak immune system, that I also blamed on my low iron levels. And he immediately referred me to a consultant at Watford General Hospital, who again took one look at my tonsils and referred me to the waiting list on Halloween in a consultation that lasted just 10 minutes. So that is how bad they were, and that is how much I needed the surgery. At this point, I was so angry with my old GP surgery, not just for making me suffer with tonsillitis for almost 10 years, but also caused me to go through life with these defunct and useless tonsils that were picking up every viral infection under the sun that I was suffering through at school and uni. And my tonsils also created a wedge in any relationship I had because of constant loud snoring. I saw a couple of friends get their tonsils out in the last few years, and they warned me about how painful it was, but I spent the days and weeks leading up to the operation simply relieved that I wouldn't have to go through yet another bout of tonsillitis. And I can't even explain how many things that tonsillitis has ruined for me. I ended up often going to work or going on nights out with it, as I had it so often, and it would just become a regular part of my life and I would just pop antibiotics like they were sweets at that point. So despite the inevitable pain, I walked into the hospital with a positive mindset, still resentful that the surgery didn't happen years ago, but relieved that it was finally happening. And a PSA for anyone having any kind of surgery during COVID: me and my whole household had to isolate for 3 days before the operation, and I had to do a PCR test 48 hours beforehand, and they did the swab themselves. They didn't trust you to do it, which made it really painful. So yeah, if you're having surgery, remember that. Now I'm going to run you through day by day what my recovery was like and how it improved or didn't improve throughout this time. So on day one, I'd say the hardest thing about this day was actually being alone, because I arrived at the hospital at 12:30 with my mum, and she was told that she couldn't come in at all because of COVID, and that was quite emotional for me. And in all honesty, I did cry quite a lot because I was having to go through my first ever surgery alone, and the 5 hours I had to wait in recovery before going home was so lonely and boring. And I ended up calling and texting everyone I knew for some company, ranging from my parents, my aunt and uncle, most of my friends, and even to my line manager at work, just to assure them that I was fine and that I would hopefully be coming back to work in a week and a half. And at this point, I was also dosed up to high heaven and was again still quite emotional because I didn't have anyone there, and the morphine, paracetamol and something else were still leading me to say that I missed my mum, which kind of worried some of the nurses, probably given my age. But I was fine with general anaesthetic, but even though it made my mum sick, I did tell them this, and because of that I think they did give me some anti-nausea medication when I went under, which really helped. And yeah, it was weird being on morphine because it kind of made me, as I say, really emotional and really affectionate, which I'm not generally like too much. I don't know if it was so much a drug or the kind of overwhelming emotions from the operation, but that's one thing I definitely know. Like, if you're on that much painkiller, it will kind of change how you behaved. The hospital staff were lovely. I can't fault them. I had a really, really nice nurse who was kind of there for me throughout the whole recovery time when I was in the hospital. And one other thing I would note about this day is that I actually could talk. A lot of friends who had their tonsils out told me that they couldn't talk for a good few days post-surgery, but I could talk normally, but I noticed my voice immediately sounded much clearer. And in this time I was also so hungry that I immediately devoured 4 pieces of toast after the operation, which I think was due to the morphine, because I did hear that a lot of people struggle to swallow immediately after operation, or maybe it was because I couldn't eat for 6 hours before my admission time, and my admission time was close to the morning, so I basically hadn't eaten all day. And my mum picked me up from the hospital at about 7 o'clock, and I got back home and noticed that my eating habits had immediately changed. The morphine was starting to wear off, and it took me about 30 minutes to get through 1 fish cake, so it was very, very difficult to eat. Sleep was okay. I had around 7 hours, which is kind of standard for what I usually get, and I only woke up once. It would become a lot worse a lot later, but I thought that it was okay, all things given. And I did notice that it had also affected my hearing and my ears, and I was warned about this before I went in because it is an ENT, ear, nose and throat surgery, and your ears and nose can also be affected by getting your tonsils out. And I found immediately that one of my ears was blocked more than the other, but it was fairly manageable and just felt like I was at the end of a really bad ear infection. The second day was kind of similar to the first. I slept okay. I had around 6 hours, but this time I didn't wake up, which kind of lulled me into a false sense of security, thinking that things were getting better. And I was eating solids immediately, and I think that this really helped. Obviously no hot food, because you're not meant to have hot food up to 7 to 10 days after the operation, but having solid cold food I think did really help me. And ice cream also became a lifesaver to soothe the throat. On days 2 to 4, I was having it around 3 times a day and look forward to it after meals. But one thing I did start to note is that even though I wasn't in too much pain, it was quite painful to eat. So I did face a dilemma over taking ibuprofen, which took the swelling down, which was my main issue after the operation, before or after having food. So if you take it before, you end up kind of feeling really sick because you'll take it on an empty stomach. But if you take it after, it means it is very, very hard to eat the initial thing that you need to eat before you take it. So I definitely say consider weighing up which ones you would prefer. I think some doctors, particularly private, do prescribe people anti-nausea medication. So if you've got that, that might be an option. I didn't have that because I wasn't prescribed any direct medication, which I'll explain more about later. But as I went to bed, the pain medication from the day before wore off, and pain did become quite excruciating by the end of day 2. Like, this is when I really noticed a shift in my recovery. And even though everything seemed to be quite normal with everything else, my mum did get me to take a laxative because she said that if you're taking too much paracetamol and ibuprofen, it will affect you. And I'm grateful she did, because turns out I did need it. So day 3 was the big seismic shift in pain. And I was previously warned by someone that day 5 to 8 was the worst days that they had in getting their tonsils out. But a lot of the blogs I'd read online and a lot of videos like this told me that it was day 3 to 8. And that is exactly what I will tell you now. Day 3 to 8 will be the worst time, and it will just be kind of a continuous stream of pain. So do be prepared for it. So on day 3, I was faced with unbearable pain waking up, and I was prescribed cocodamol for my last bout of tonsillitis when I went to the GP. So I was in so much pain. I had a slice of toast beforehand, which was very painful to eat, but then I immediately reached for the cocodamol and took 2 tablets. Everything was fine for an hour. It did the trick. The pain went down, subsided loads. I felt very zen, very, very drugged up on it. But then around an hour and a half after taking the pills, no exaggeration, I felt like I was dying. And it turns out I had a severe reaction to cocodamol and was doubled over with a worse stomachache, on par with when I had norovirus a couple of years ago, for around 30 to 45 minutes. I started retching, having delusions, and a panic attack while screaming that I felt like I was dying, and I told my parents to call 999. And I sat in the fetal position, sipping green tea and biting on toast throughout that whole 30 to 45 minute period. So I would strongly advise people not to take cocodamol, no matter how bad the pain is, as a side effect of stomachache and nausea are even worse than the throat pain that you get from getting your tonsils out. However, I do know that some doctors prescribe anti-nausea medication to help with this, so if you are going to take cocodamol or any other kind of opioid, make sure that you take this with that. So due to me needing to detox from the cocodamol, I scaled back my pain relief and came off ibuprofen, as I thought it might have reacted with it, which was a mistake, as by day 5 I was needing it again, and it did play a key role in reducing the swelling in my mouth so I could eat more comfortably. On day 3 I found that swallowing was awful, but I still had at least 2.5 litres of water a day, because apparently the more water you drink the faster you recover, and I definitely think that it did help me. And also I was struggling with constipation, but that did return to normal after taking another laxative, so I would definitely advise you to keep taking these, as that will become a whole other issue that you don't need to deal with on top of the issues you had getting your tonsils out. The blockage in my ear also disappeared on this day, which was good because I was getting so much pain from my throat, I really didn't need it anywhere else. And I was eating okay, even though it was painful, but I really didn't feel like eating heavy things. Like, I remember on this day, I had the start of a pasta for dinner, but I ended up eating a load of crackers instead. Even though they were kind of harder to eat, they were lighter, and I didn't really fancy anything heavy, so my appetite really went downhill at this point. But I made sure that the crackers I had were high fibre, obviously assisting with the issues of constipation. But I was warned that day 4 would be the worst day by my surgeon. However, I didn't actually think it was. I thought day 5, 6, 7 were worse than this, but day 4 was still not great. It was about the same as day 3. Sleep was still really bad. Like, I was waking up a lot more, around 2 to 3 times in the night, and getting less sleep overall. And I just remember absolutely dreading going to bed at this point, knowing that I was in for a really horrible night. But it was good because I could breathe out of my nose again on day 4. And after I had the operation, I could only breathe out my mouth. I couldn't breathe out my nose. But by day 4, I was breathing out my nose again, which was such a relief that I didn't have to sleep on my back the entire time, because I like sleeping on my side, breathing out my nose, so I can kind of get back to doing that again. By day 5, things had gotten a lot worse. Eating ice cream now hurt, and ice cream was pretty much a lifesaver for soothing my throat in the first 4 days. But yeah, eating ice cream was incredibly painful on this day, and this day was particularly hard because I was actually very hungry, likely due to the deficit of food that I had on the previous days, but eating was too painful to bother attempting, so I kind of sat there starving for most of this day. And this is also the day where eating anything cold started to hinder more than help in terms of pain, and I heard that it was the same for a few people that have gone through this. So from this day, I would say eating really cold foods such as ice cream and ice cubes really didn't help me anymore. And having a bottle of water with every meal that I had was a must to just get food down. Like, if I didn't really moisten my throat, there was no point in eating because nothing would go down. I also had this massive scab that was hanging off my uvula, which is a word that I didn't know before, but it's kind of the thing that goes in between your tonsils, and that had a huge scab on it, which meant that whenever I swallowed anything, it would kind of touch it, and it would just feel really disgusting and really uncomfortable to swallow. And I also had a really swollen tongue, which made eating worse. And ibuprofen helped. I came back on ibuprofen on this day because I just could not swallow anything and I needed the swelling to be taken down. But obviously it became more of an issue because I had been off ibuprofen for a few days, so this was probably an issue that was bigger than it should have been. I also found that it was becoming harder to talk. I found it relatively okay to talk after I had the operation, which, as I mentioned, was quite unusual compared to some of my friends who had had it. But on this day, it was becoming very hard to talk. My voice was sounding more hoarse and quiet than it was previously. But on this day, something did pick up because my humidifier came, and I was warned by one of my friends who had his tonsils out a couple of months before me that having a humidifier by your bed is a must to keep your mouth like more moistened at night and make sure you don't wake up as much. And this was a game changer for me. But the most annoying thing was that the humidifier only lasted about 5 hours. So I woke up immediately after it ran out, and had to take more pain medication, which was really annoying. But overall, it did help things. But I just remember before the humidifier came having a breakdown crying. Like, I hadn't actually cried other than when I was in the hospital during the recovery, but I was just crying so much because I was in so much pain. And my stepdad gave me some honey, which was genuinely like the best thing for soothing my throat. I was so gutted I didn't take it earlier. That's definitely one thing I'd recommend if you need a quick fix to feel better. So I found that day 6 was pretty much the same as day 5 and probably my most painful day, likely caused by me scaling back my pain relief, as I mentioned before, and cutting out the ibuprofen, like what I can only describe myself as an arrogant idiot. And it was worse with food on this day. I remember I could only manage a slice of toast, a bowl of cornflakes, and about 5 little crackers before dinner. That was all I could eat throughout the whole day. And at this point, paracetamol did basically anything. I was taking normal strength paracetamol from Tesco and I found that it really did nothing. It dulled pain for about half an hour and that was it. I might as well have been on no pain medication, and I went back on the ibuprofen before dinner. So I was trying to scale back, not taking it all the time, but then I realised I did need the 3 doses a day. So I immediately went back on that before dinner. And it did change things. I remember one of my friends came round with a McDonald's and it crushed me not to be able to eat all of it because normally I'd wolf that down in a matter of minutes. But I ate about half and I definitely think that was the influence of the regular ibuprofen causing that. And I also had an earache, so I didn't explicitly kind of lose any hearing or kind of anything like that, but I just had like a dull earache return, obviously due to the ear, nose and throat all being connected. And this was also notably the first day that I started to see blood in my spit with scabs coming off. And I was warned that you'd see this from around day 5. And this is normal as it was only a few flecks. And if this happens to you, you shouldn't be alarmed by it. My blood was kind of a reddish brown colour. It looked old. But if you do get any bright red blood come up, or if blood is a constant presence in your spit, go straight to A&E because it shows that you might actually have an infection. So on day 7, I had pretty much the worst sleep ever that night between day 6 and day 7, and I changed the timings of my pain medication obviously as I was trying to kind of take paracetamol less, take ibuprofen more, which didn't work. So by this day I was taking the maximum dosage of everything. I was on paracetamol 4 times in the day and Nurofen 3. So my mum bought me Nurofen because apparently it works quicker than ibuprofen. I mean, I don't really know, but it did the trick, so I'm guessing there must be some truth to that. And the thought of only one more bad day is what kept me going, because obviously I heard that after day 8 things get better, so that was what was making me push through day 7. Other than that, I was really struggling. And I remember the earache came back and it kicked in big time in the morning, but when I took the painkillers, it eased off quite a lot. But one good thing about this day was that for the first time I managed to eat properly, and I think that's because I was on the maximum dosage of painkillers. So one thing I would say is stick to the maximum dosage. Do not think that you can scale it back and come off it, because it will come back to bite you. So I remember having cornflakes and half of my leftover McDonald's milkshake for breakfast, and then a vegetable soup for lunch, and it was good because I didn't have to religiously sip water to get food down as I had done the previous days. And my energy levels were also high, which was likely due to me eating something close to a proper meal the night before. And as it was day 7, this was the day that I was told that I could reintroduce hot foods back into my life. And I remember eating the soup at a slightly warmer temperature than just lukewarm, which was just fine. But obviously I still relied on painkillers on this day. And I remember binge watching a whole Netflix series. It was called Made, which I've been meaning to watch for a while. And it is really good, so I do recommend it. Because I didn't feel up to even reading anything just yet. Like my energy, even though it was a lot higher, was still not high enough to kind of get through a whole book. But the pain was a lot better than the last few days. And I don't know if it's because it was day 7 or because I went back on the ibuprofen, but other than that horrible night's sleep, things were kind of starting to look up by the end of this day. And I remember on this day I weighed myself and I'd lost 2 kg, which was significant because I've been the same weight for the last 5 or so years and rarely go up or down. And although I was only 52 kg before the operation, I didn't have much weight to lose, so this was quite alarming for me. Like 2 kg was quite significant, particularly since I don't tend to like lose or put on weight that easily. And I remember taking paracetamol every 4 hours and ibuprofen the 2 hours in between. But the paracetamol had caffeine, which I don't take regularly. So it did give me heart palpitations, which was kind of scary. And I remember taking my last dose at 3 p.m, waiting all the way until bed before taking another one. And because this made eating quite painful because I wasn't taking paracetamol too close to dinner, I remember having to chew a lot of sugarless gum. And that's one thing that I read online, like chewing sugarless gum. And it was really good because it kind of keeps your mouth moving and it does kind of numb your mouth for eating a lot. So I was taking that as a substitute for pain medication when I couldn't take pain medication close to meal times. I also realised pretty late in this day that while my throat and ears were in pain, Paracetamol was actually making little difference, but ibuprofen was making the real difference, because the main issue that I had was that my tongue was really swollen, and it made kind of eating and any kind of heavy breathing really, really painful and was causing most of the pain. And then on this day, after being fine for a couple of days, constipation made a return, which added another issue to my ever-growing plate. Day 8 was when the earache for me really got really, really bad. And I heard from a couple of people that earache was actually their worst symptom, not so much the throat. I'd say for me that throat was definitely still the worst rather than ear and nose. But yeah, the earache really did hurt on this day. Although much of my scabs had cleared and I could see that my throat was beginning to become more reddish pink again rather than white, which was really good to see. And I remember on this day having to go to the doctors to get stronger painkillers, because I remember saying to my mum, I'm struggling to speak and I'm struggling to eat very well, when before I was kind of improving in these areas. I felt like I was regressing. So I did end up going to the doctor, and I remember the doctor putting a thermometer in my ear to check my temperature, and it ended up pressing on my throat. Like, that is how close the two were linked, and that is kind of how much pain I was in both of them. And on this day, I was prescribed naproxen, which was hopefully going to help me sleep through the night, because the main reason I went to the doctor on this day was that I woke up at 5 a.m. in tears and had to be put to bed with ibuprofen by my mum because the pain was that bad. And on this day, after I took the naproxen, I found that eating had become better. I had 4 small meals, but I was still constipated, so my mum gave me some Movicol, which would hopefully help with that. And I also found that sleeping on my side, which was my favourite position, had become painful, so I was still sleeping on my back at this point. Day 9 was just so much better. Like, everything felt quite good for me on this day, apart from the fact that I had a very painful throat in the morning, which is a usual thing. When you have this operation, you wake up in the morning and it is the most pain you've been in because you're so dehydrated and your mouth is dry. But this pain did calm down with paracetamol so that I could eat some toast, and then the naproxen did its thing and I felt okay for the rest of the day, which was again bolstered by a 9-hour sleep with only a minor wake up. Thank you, naproxen, my lifesaver drug. I also noticed on this day that there was a lot of dried blood coming out in my spit and saliva due to the scabbing. And again, as I mentioned before, this is normal, but I'd say that this was the peak day for this. And because of the naproxen making me eat again properly, I had so much food after it kicked in. Like, I remember eating yogurt, soup, crackers, crisps. My diet was finally returning to normal, and I finally felt like I had almost the same energy levels I had before the operation. And I remember I was milking this lack of pain whenever I was eating, as I know from what it was like at night how painful it is to eat in the morning when the pain medication wears off. And eating again properly was just the best feeling ever. And the fact that my sleep was improving too, like, I could not recommend this drug enough if you're getting your tonsils out. And this was also the day that I went out for the first time. Like, I ventured out of the house. I'd been in the house for 9 days, so I was feeling very cooped up and it was just getting a bit much. So I went to see the Christmas lights in my village, and I ate a whole pizza as well, which I was very impressed at myself about, because I couldn't eat a whole anything for so long. And I still had some intense earache and tongue pain. As I mentioned, the tongue was kind of the worst thing for me with the swelling, but this again dulled with the naproxen, which was pretty much saving me. On day 10, I still woke up in 5 a.m. in pain, but not as much, thanks to the impact of the naproxen and also the paracetamol, which was starting to work again. I also ventured out of the house to just go see a friend, which wasn't too bad, but I did find myself getting really tired when I was kind of out for like a couple of hours. So I definitely say limit your activity right after you get your tonsils out up until about day 12, 13, because you will be very tired even if you don't feel it initially. And on this day, I could slowly eat sugar again. I remember trying to introduce any form of sugar or chocolate or sweet to my diet quite early on, and it just hurt way too much to eat. But on day 10, it was starting to feel okay to eat it again. I remember finally starting my Lindor advent calendar that my parents had bought me a while back. And on day 11, I had a 10-hour sleep. It was disturbed, but a 10-hour sleep is a 10-hour sleep, so that felt great. And I also noticed a real significant improvement even from day 9. There was a reduction in pain, so I came off all pain medication, which was just the best feeling after being on it for so long and having to keep track of everything I was taking. And by this day, it just kind of felt like I had a sore throat similar to when I had tonsillitis, so not the same excruciating pain I had for the first kind of 8 days. But I also found that constipation was becoming a major problem from all the meds that I'd taken, and it was leading me to get stomachache and headaches. So yeah, even though I was getting over the throat pain, the causes of the medication were kind of doing their thing at this point, which meant that I wasn't fully comfortable. By day 12, waking up in the morning was still quite painful. That was kind of an ongoing common theme until the next day. I had another 10-hour disturbed sleep, which was again good for my energy levels, even if it was disturbed. Like, the length of it really, really helped. But my throat pain soon reverted to being manageable once I'd gotten up. I could eat without painkillers at this point, which was such a relief, given that painkillers were a lifesaver for me being able to eat. Again, it felt like kind of a normal sore throat, or when I kind of usually had a bout of tonsillitis. The earache was also still there at this point, but it was more manageable. It was just kind of there in the background, and I was trying my best to ignore it. And as I mentioned, my sleep was still disturbed. Sleeping on my side was still painful, but it was improving. This was slightly better. And the laxatives did their thing and worked, so I luckily didn't have to deal with the constipation anymore. Day 13 was a day where I'd say things pretty much returned to normal for me. I slept through the night for the first time fully, which was great. And this was also the day that I returned to work, albeit from home. I still kind of had a dull, aching sore throat, and this went on for, I'd say, maybe another week, getting gradually better each day. But my constipation had gone. I overall felt a lot better. I felt a lot more back to my normal self on this day. So if you've made it this far into the video, you know that I kind of have given a little bit of advice on kind of what helped me and what didn't help me, but I thought it would be helpful kind of do a little section on my overall tips for anyone who is going to go through this operation. And the first one is to stick to paracetamol and naproxen or ibuprofen when things start to get a little bit better, because the side effects of stronger stuff, at least for me, weren't worth relieving the throat pain. And for me, it was the ibuprofen and naproxen that made enough difference on their own. So they will kind of be your friends. They will be kind of the key pain medication for you. And my recommendation is to always take paracetamol 4 times a day and naproxen 2 or ibuprofen 3, at least for the first 8 or so days, because even if you think you don't need it, the pain will creep up if you miss a dose or kind of decide to take less, and you will regret not taking it. And I found that extra strength paracetamol was so much better than regular paracetamol, and it did make a real difference to the pain. I had extra strength paracetamol with caffeine capsules from the Co-op, although I did have to come off them when they started increasing my heartbeat rapidly after a few days. So I also alternated between Nurofen and ibuprofen from Tesco for my kind of anti-inflammatory pain medication before being prescribed the naproxen. I found that the Nurofen and the kind of Tesco own brand ibuprofen were both equally as good as suppressing inflammation and pain. Nurofen perhaps works slightly quicker, as I mentioned what my mum said about it. I would definitely say to go on naproxen as soon as the pain gets worse. So that was day 3 or 4 for me, and my biggest regret was waiting until day 7. But again, it was also my surgeon's fault for not prescribing it. When I left the hospital, I was just given the Difflam oral throat spray, which helped a bit, but then after a while it started to sting and then really didn't do much beyond relieving pain for around 10 minutes. I told them that I had paracetamol and ibuprofen at home and that I was prescribed cocodamol earlier, and I think that's why they didn't directly give me those. But yeah, I was a bit annoyed that they didn't tell me about naproxen and how much good it could do. I mean, my mum only told the doctor about it and asked the doctor to prescribe it to me because her friend's daughter had her tonsils out and that was her lifesaver drug. So yeah, I would definitely recommend asking to go on that if you can. Another thing I would recommend is to eat solid foods as soon as possible. I regressed with this. Like, I was eating solid foods from day 1 because I found it okay. But obviously I regressed as the pain intensified, but it helped that like I'd already kind of eaten a lot of solid foods on day 1, 2 and part of 3, because it meant that when I wasn't eating so much later, at least I'd gotten my throat used to it earlier on. My surgeon also told me to eat 5 times a day, even if not full meals and you're just snacking. It's always good to have something small to keep the mouth moving quite regularly and get it used to eating food again. And I did mention this before, but eating and sleeping are both so painful and the hardest things to do in recovery. And this was really sad because they're known as like the loves of my life. So it was really sad to like not be able to eat or sleep properly. Another thing that I would recommend is drinking around 2.5 litres of water every day to keep hydrated and stave off the chance of infection, because infection comes from not eating enough solid food early or not drinking enough. And I think one of the reasons why I was lucky enough to dodge an infection, unlike some people I know and some people in videos like this I've watched, is because I was eating solid foods very early on and drinking so much water. And it also helps to fight against constipation, which, as I said, is a big issue. I would definitely recommend writing off any kind of outdoor activity at all until at least day 10. You'll be lethargic from the lack of food, and it is impractical due to the pain you're in to kind of go out quite a lot. I normally do an intense HIIT workout at least 4 days a week, but I hadn't gone back to any kind of exercise until literally 3 weeks after the operation, because apparently it can interfere with scabs coming off. I remember starting with kind of yoga and that kind of thing on day 14, but it wasn't until really the following week, 3 weeks after the operation, where I actually got back to doing really intense exercise again. And another thing is you should make the choice between nausea and painful eating, which is a horrible choice to make, because if you take painkillers, you'll feel sick, but you'll be able to eat without pain. But if you don't take painkillers before eating, it will be a struggle to get through that kind of first bite of something before you can take them. You also need to make the choice between taking painkillers in the middle of the night or not, because sometimes you'll wake up and you'll want a painkiller, but obviously if you're not the kind of person who gets to sleep very easily after getting up and doing something, that might be impractical for you. So I would definitely say to try and test different options with medication to see which works for you. And another thing that I would recommend, much like the naproxen doing earlier, is getting a humidifier. Having it from day one would really, really have helped. It is really good for sleeping through the night. And another thing is having a cold pack around your neck when the pain is particularly bad. I found that it didn't really do too much, but it was good for when I kind of had friends around and I wanted to talk to them. And to that point, I would definitely recommend having friends over all the time, because it distracts you from wallowing in the pain, which is what I tended to do when I didn't have anyone around me. And I had a different friend come to visit me every day for the first 10 days, and it definitely made me feel a lot better, as it kept me positive and entertained and helped to take my mind off the pain I was in. And as I mentioned before, definitely take laxatives, because even if you can poo, it hurts and it strains your throat even more. So yeah, it helps to make it softer, which makes that a lot easier. And definitely have a film or TV watch list ready, as you can't do anything else and you will not get this time to watch this much TV again. I got through so many series. I remember Maid, Dash and Lily on Netflix, and then also Alex Rider on Amazon Prime, as well as countless cheesy Christmas movies. So yeah, definitely use this time to be TV productive at least. And the key thing that I would mention is to eat as much as you can when you can manage it, or when the painkillers are in full force, because you'll never know when the pain will kick in again and you can't eat. And time to get painkillers down just before meal times is absolutely crucial to make sure that you can eat. The one key thing that I would mention about this operation is that it will take its toll on you mentally. And I'm not going to lie, there were times the temptation to overdose on codeine to get through the pain and get out of the pain did crop up. And there were so many times I regretted having the surgery done, particularly on days 3 to 8 when the pain was particularly bad and when I woke up in the middle of the night. But given how each day felt like day 1 of tonsillitis on repeat after that, and that I would have still had tonsillitis many more times had I not had the surgery, it really was worth it. And plus the fact that my huge bothersome tonsils were now gone means that my mouth feels a whole lot lighter, and hopefully this now means I will get fewer viral infections, which is always positive. So yeah, thank you for listening. I really hope this is helpful, and if you are going to get your tonsils out in the future, good luck, and definitely keep abreast of kind of everything happening to you. Keep referring back to videos and blogs online. Like, make sure that you get support from your friends and family. But yeah,